Western world had their first word of the successful probe from an English source, the Jodrell Bank Observatory near Manchester. Here, with the world's largest antenna, they recorded pictures sent out by Lunar 9. The pictures show that the soil is rough-textured and sponge-like with little dust, ideal for landing a manned spacecraft.
Perched atop an Atlas Centaur rocket, Surveyor, loaded with television cameras, is launched at Cape Kennedy. The moon is only 231,000 miles away. The target is an incredibly small 2-by-5 mile area which this craft must hit dead center for best results. Now, a critical point in Surveyor's flight, the automatic terminal landing sequence. Retro rocket engines act like air brakes. Surveyor is still guided by radar, while the reverse rockets slow its descent to an amazing 13 feet per second. A first try touchdown as light as a feather. A command from Surveyor Control, Pasadena, California, triggers the craft's TV cameras. And now, our American Earth vehicle sends live television pictures back to the globe 250,000 miles away. This historic picture, in which Surveyor photographs itself, clearly shows one of the craft's legs, its foot pad and antenna. This close-up shows a 6-by-12-inch moon rock. The moon, the world of the future. A population milestone is reached in the nation's capital, where President Johnson speaks as census clocks record a birth every 8.5 seconds. Finally, the clocks indicate a U.S. population of 200 million Americans. Experts predict it'll go to 300 million by the year 2000.
While the census clock showed the increase in population, across the world, the war was taking a heavy toll. Vietnam became the place where death was a way of life.
The largest offensive to date by South Vietnamese and American troops forces thousands of peasants to move from the so-called Iron Triangle of the Mekong Delta. 4 entire villages have to be relocated. This region has been a prime recruiting area for the Viet Cong guerrillas. It's the most important center of communist power in the South, but now it will become uninhabitable. The refugees with their belongings are transported to special camps, while Operation Cedar Falls continues to sweep through their former villages in a giant mop-up, which devastates the Viet Cong stronghold. But families continue their daily routines in their new homes, filled with hope that one day they'll be able to return to their villages and their crops.
But the rest of the world was not prepared to ignore the crisis. Protests were mounted as people of all persuasions sat in judgment of the United States' involvement.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations. Organized by the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, mimics of Queen Elizabeth presented mock medals and said the war was a wicked obscenity. Madrid University, scene of the largest anti-American rally in recent years. Posters, leaflets, slogans, and student speeches all carried a vehemence seldom seen here before. Some 3,000 undergraduates attended. An American flag is burned at the height of the demonstration. Both President Johnson and Francisco Franco were vilified. A new low in public protest, added strain on Spanish-American relations. Central Park is the starting point for the parade to the UN building. The estimated 125,000 Manhattan marchers include students, housewives, beatnik poets, doctors, businessmen, teachers, priests, and nuns. Before the parade, mass draft card burning was urged. Demonstrators claimed 200 cards were burned, but no accurate count could be determined. Reporters and onlookers were jostled away on purpose. Although mostly peaceful, shouted confrontations were frequent and fiery during the course of the march. The anti-war marchers were picketed by anti-war marchers who were hawkish toward the parading doves. Civil rights leader Martin Luther King leads the procession to the United Nations, where he urges UN pressure to force the U.S. to stop bombing North Vietnam. Police arrested 5 persons as disorderly. 3 were grabbed when they rushed the parade float. No serious injuries, however, in New York's biggest anti-war march. A companion peace demonstration brings out 50,000 marchers in downtown San Francisco. They parade 2 miles along Market Street, pacifists and hippies together. Gigantic Kezar Stadium holds the mass rally, where anti-war songs and speeches trigger a short scuffle between pro and con factions. No one was injured. Both demonstrations were sponsored by a loose coalition of left-wing, pacifist, and moderate anti-war groups. President Johnson, meanwhile, let it be known that the FBI is closely watching all anti-war activity. The worst race riots since those 2 years ago in the Watts section of Los Angeles rocked New Jersey's largest city, Newark, for 5 consecutive days and nights. At least 24 persons are killed, more than 1,800 wounded, some 1,400 arrested. Despite patrolling by the mob makes any official-looking vehicle a target. 2 days after its beginning, police are augmented by National Guardsmen. Snipers make the streets a battlefield. Governor Hughes terms the rioting open rebellion, just like wartime. Sniper fire from open windows kills 2 policemen, a fire captain shot in the back while answering a false alarm, and several bystanders. Scores of police, troopers, guardsmen, and civilians are wounded. Officials said the snipers, some believed not to be Newark residents, used guns stolen from a local rifle factory. Even machine guns were used. President Johnson, using firm words, urges the nation's citizens to support the maintenance of law and order.
I know that the vast majority of Negroes and whites are shocked and are outraged by them. Pillage, looting, murder, and arson have nothing to do with civil rights. They are criminal conduct. Your president calls upon all of our people in all of our cities to join in a determined program to maintain law and order, to condemn and to combat lawlessness in all of its forms, and firmly to show by word and by deed that riots, looting, and public disorder will just not be tolerated.
Because of widespread looting, 8 emergency food centers are set up to supply milk, bread, and cereal to besieged and terrorized residents. Looters arrested by National Guardsmen are dealt with swiftly. A 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew is clamped on fully 1/3 of Newark. While Newark struggles to restore peace and order, the racial bitterness spreads to 4 nearby suburban towns, where a policeman is beaten to death, guns are stolen, looting and violence are reported. New Jersey, a state under siege. War in the Middle East. Israeli forces drive spearheads across the Sinai Peninsula, west to the Suez Canal, south to the entrance of the Gulf of Aqaba, breaking the blockade. Of the 1956 Sinai campaign was instrumental in mapping his nation's battle plan. The sudden swiftness of the Israeli army crushed UAR forces with a combined air and ground 1-2 punch. Egypt's charges that U.S. and British air units aided Israel are vigorously denied, while diplomatic relations are broken. Efforts toward a ceasefire continue at the United Nations. U.S. Ambassador Arthur Goldberg introduces the peace plan. An immediate debate is started in the Security Council representing 15 nations. The vote is finally taken and the resolution adopted unanimously. Word continues to come from the battle zone, telling of sweeping Israeli victories. Next day, Egypt accepts the UN ceasefire, joining Jordan. This left Syria facing Israeli forces alone. The United Nations arena remains in the world spotlight because of the many questions raised by the short but decisive Middle East war. With Israel now controlling the Sinai Peninsula, all approaches to the Suez Canal, Old Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and the Gulf of Aqaba, the diplomatic struggle now begins. Apollo astronauts Roger Chaffee, Edward White, and Gus Grissom lose their lives in a tragic flash fire aboard their grounded space capsule. The tragedy occurred during a simulated countdown for the first flight of the Apollo program, whose goal is to put a man on the moon by 1970. When the tragedy struck, one of the astronauts shouted, "Fire in the spacecraft!" In a few seconds, all three were victims of the swift inferno which left the capsule a blackened shell. One reporter said it looked like the inside of a furnace. Investigators theorize that perhaps a short circuit or electrical overload may have sparked the blaze. 27 would-be rescuers were all overcome by smoke and heat. Astronauts Chaffee, White, and Grissom, martyred heroes who gave their lives in total dedication to duty. Their memory will forever be honored.